Hi.
I guess it started with those small changes in Rachel's behavior. It wasn't like she came home with lipstick on her collar or anything. No, it was subtler. She'd pull away when I reached for her hand, started going to the gym religiously, which by the way was never her thing, and suddenly Brad, the guy from her office, was all she talked about. One night, as she gushed over how Brad had this amazing sense of humor, or how Brad could solve anything, something in me flipped. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but honestly, the math started adding up. She'd spend more time out, claiming she was working late or just needed some space. And that's how I found myself sitting in my car in the gym parking lot, one cold Wednesday night, watching her through the window. She didn't see me, too absorbed in some conversation with Brad by the treadmills. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. But I wasn't about to storm in. I knew it wouldn't get me anywhere. I just needed to be sure. As the days went on, I became a detective in my own life. I combed through her phone when she was asleep, checked her email when she forgot to log out. That's when I hit the jackpot, her inbox, full of exchanges between her and Brad. They'd been planning weekend getaways, and there were pictures too, Rachel with Brad, both of them looking happier than I'd seen her in years. There it was, all the proof I'd never wanted to find. Once I had those emails in front of me, it was like my whole world split in two. There was the life I thought I had with Rachel, simple, predictable, and mostly happy. And then there was this other life she'd been building with Brad behind my back, like some twisted double feature I hadn't signed up for. I stayed up all night reading through the emails, finding myself going over the same words again and again just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. She'd been lying to me for months, right under my nose. One email was all about some weekend getaway where she told me she was going to help her sister out in Seattle. The pictures attached to the email said otherwise. She and Brad were all cozied up in some cabin, arms wrapped around each other, looking like they didn't have a care in the world. The next day, she left for work like it was any other morning, while I was still sitting there, running on maybe an hour of sleep, trying to make sense of everything. I remember watching her walk out the door, still half smiling at me like she always did, and it felt like I was seeing a stranger. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more time to figure out what to do, and honestly, I wasn't ready to face the fallout. So I kept digging. I set up a camera in the hallway and another one near our garage, just to see who she was sneaking around with. Over the next few days, I even checked her social media, looking for any small clue I might have missed. Everything looked normal on the surface, but I knew the truth now, and there was no going back. Then one evening, I found a message exchange between her and Brad where she outright admitted she felt alive around him in a way she never had with Jason. That hit me like a sledgehammer. It wasn't just that she was seeing someone else, it was that she decided I wasn't enough for her. It hurt like hell, but I forced myself to keep reading, to keep collecting every piece of evidence I could get my hands on. I wasn't about to confront her without everything lined up. And I'd be lying if I said a part of me didn't want to make her feel the weight of what she'd done, to watch her try to talk her way out of it when there was no way out. But still, there was this part of me that wanted to understand. Why Brad? Why now? And when did she decide I wasn't enough? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I just knew that this wasn't going to end with me being the fool. If she wanted a new life so bad, she'd get it, just not the way she'd planned. After a few days of sleepless nights and a growing pile of evidence, I finally reached a turning point. I didn't just want proof for myself anymore. I wanted to use it to protect myself. If Rachel thought she could just walk away from this marriage, taking half of everything and rewriting history, she was dead wrong. I'd make sure she didn't get to walk all over me. I decided to record a confession. It seemed crazy, but I needed her to admit to everything on tape. I set it up carefully, checking the laws in our state so it'd hold up in court. I wasn't about to risk her twisting this story or claiming I'd made it all up. That night, I played it cool. I cooked dinner, poured her a glass of wine, and sat across the table, trying to act as if nothing was bothering me. She barely noticed I was watching her closely. She was too busy scrolling on her phone, laughing at some message. Probably from Brad. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but I kept it in check. After dinner, I went into the bedroom and asked her to join me. She looked a little surprised since I'd been distant lately, but she came in, setting her phone aside. I told her I wanted to talk, that I'd noticed she seemed distant, and I wondered if there was something on her mind. At first she deflected, saying it was just work stress, but I kept pressing gently, asking if maybe it was something more, something she wasn't telling me. Finally, after enough prodding, she cracked. She looked at me, shrugged, and then said it, almost nonchalantly, "All right, yeah, there's been someone else. But honestly, can you blame me?" I needed a little excitement. Her words were so cold, so detached, like she was discussing the weather. I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm, and kept her talking. She spilled it all, explaining how she needed something more, and how Brad gave her a thrill that she couldn't find with me. I made sure every word was caught on my phone's recorder, hidden under a pillow. She went on, making it sound like her affair was a reasonable response to some boredom, like I was the one who'd somehow forced her to cheat. When she finished, she just sat there, almost relieved, like confessing had lifted some weight off her shoulders. I wanted to yell, to ask her how she could do this to me, to us. But I didn't. Instead, I thanked her for being honest and left the room, claiming I needed to clear my head. The second I got out of that room, I hit play on the recording. Hearing her say it all, hearing her claim Brad made her feel alive, while talking about me like I was some predictable, lifeless placeholder, it hurt like nothing I'd felt before. But that hurt turned into a strange kind of focus, a determination. I called a divorce attorney the next morning, one with a reputation for leaving nothing on the table. He listened to my story and told me I had a good case, especially with the confession. He advised me to keep gathering evidence, to hold my cards close, and to let him handle the legal side. That was fine by me. I was ready to do whatever it took to make sure Rachel didn't get 1 cent more than she deserved. Rachel thought she'd found a new life, but she was about to realize just how carefully I'd been planning to take it all back. With the recording in my pocket and a lawyer on my side, I felt a strange calm take over. Every interaction with Rachel became part of a bigger plan. She still had no clue what was coming, but I was prepared to wait her out, play along, and let her keep digging her own hole. A few days later, Rachel hit me with a surprise of her own. She sat me down in the living room and started talking in this overly calm, almost pitying tone. I remember her exact words. "Jason, I think we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a while. Maybe it's time we go our separate ways, for both our sakes." It was surreal. Here she was, acting like she was making some generous offer when I already knew about her and Brad. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of a reaction, so I nodded, letting her believe I was on board. I told her I wanted things to be as smooth as possible, especially since we had years of memories and mutual friends. She looked relieved, probably thinking I was just going to roll over and let her take whatever she wanted. But the next part blindsided me. Rachel actually had the audacity to claim I'd been emotionally distant and cold, and that she'd been unhappy for a long time. She hinted at me being too focused on work, making me sound like some negligent husband. I just listened, nodding, filing away every word as I kept my poker face. All I could think was, she's setting up her narrative. It hit me that she was going to try to twist this, to rewrite our whole relationship, and somehow make herself the victim. I walked out of that conversation knowing I had to step up my game. I called my lawyer, telling him everything Rachel had said, and he advised me to be ready for anything, even if it meant defending my own character in court. He suggested I start documenting everything, any interactions that painted the real story, especially any conversations with Rachel that showed her trying to manipulate the situation. And just like that, Rachel turned up the heat. She started filing paperwork, listing emotional neglect as grounds for divorce, claiming that I'd ignore her needs and that she'd been forced into her affair as some desperate attempt to find happiness. I couldn't believe it. The woman who'd been sneaking around with Brad was trying to paint me as the reason for her betrayal. She even threw in accusations of me being controlling and emotionally abusive, hoping to sway the court in her favor. But she didn't know what I had. I handed my lawyer every email, every photo, every piece of proof of her affair with Brad, and that recorded confession where she admitted everything. My lawyer just nodded, saying we were in a good position, but that we needed to be careful. I kept a low profile, never letting on that I was on to her. Meanwhile, Rachel seemed more confident, even smug, like she was sure I'd come out of this with nothing. I knew the day was coming when she'd realize just how wrong she was, and I was prepared to wait as long as it took. The next couple of weeks were like watching some strange performance where Rachel played the role of the wronged wife. She went around telling friends and family that we were amicably splitting because we'd grown apart. I heard she was throwing around words like toxic and emotionally abusive, making it sound like I'd been some cold-hearted husband who drove her into Brad's arms. At first, I wanted to jump in and tell everyone the truth. But my lawyer advised me to let her dig her own grave, that her lies would come back to bite her. And honestly, It felt almost satisfying to watch her get comfortable in this made-up story, thinking she had everyone fooled. She had no idea what was waiting for her. A couple of days later, she handed me a proposed division of assets. And get this, she had Brad's name right there on the paperwork as a witness. She wanted half of everything: the house, the savings, my retirement, even some of my family heirlooms. All while she was sitting across from me with that rehearsed look of sympathy on her face, pretending this was some civil mutual decision. So I looked at her, nodded, and said I'd take it under consideration. She seemed so smug, probably thinking she'd backed me into a corner. But all I could think was how satisfying it was going to be when she saw the truth for what it was. A week later, my lawyer finally scheduled a meeting with Rachel's attorney to lay everything out. Rachel and I were seated across from each other at this big conference table, her lawyer beside her, and mine beside me. Rachel didn't look at me once, just kept her eyes fixed on the stack of documents in front of her, probably hoping to avoid any awkward glances. Then my lawyer started to speak. He handed Rachel's attorney the file, thick with every email, every photo, and that recording of her confession. Her attorney looked through it, flipping pages, his expression getting stiffer with every turn. Meanwhile, Rachel's face shifted from smug confidence to confusion. She didn't know yet, but it was coming. My lawyer laid it out clean and simple, pointing out that she had violated our prenuptial agreement, that her adultery nullified any claim she had to my assets, and that her own words in the recording would show the court exactly who was at fault. For the first time in weeks, Rachel looked directly at me, her face pale as it all sank in. She tried to recover, saying that we should still be fair and split things for the sake of closure. But her attorney gave her a look, realizing it was game over. He pulled her aside, and they whispered furiously in the corner, her face going red as he explained what was in front of them. She was realizing, right there in that conference room, that everything she'd planned to take from me was slipping through her fingers. I didn't say a word. I just sat back, watching the woman who'd tried to paint me as the villain realize she had nothing left to stand on. After that meeting, Rachel went into full panic mode. I'd thought the truth would be enough to make her back down, but she was relentless. Over the next few days, I noticed her trying every trick in the book to claw back some control. First, she tried to get sentimental. She'd corner me in the kitchen or text me long emotional messages late at night, claiming she'd been going through a hard time and that her fling with Brad wasn't anything serious. She wanted me to believe she'd made a mistake, a lapse in judgment, as if those messages about romantic weekends were just a one-time thing. She'd throw in some teary-eyed line about how we could still salvage things if we just tried to start over. I'll admit, there was a moment where I almost fell for it. Almost. But then I'd remember that cold way she'd admitted to everything, the smug look she'd worn when she first brought up the divorce. So I let her go on, saying she was sorry and never meant to hurt me, but I kept it short, letting her know she'd done all the damage she could. When the sympathy card didn't work, she turned to anger. She started threatening that she'd tell everyone her version of events if I didn't make things easier for her. She'd claim she'd make it so that I'd never have a social life again, and that people would see me as the real villain here. Part of me wanted to laugh, because I already knew her lies were about to crumble. But I stayed calm, told her she could say whatever she wanted, and left it at that. What really surprised me was her next move. Out of nowhere, she tried to use our shared friends as pawns. I started getting texts and calls from people who'd heard things and wanted to know my side. Rachel had told them all some twisted version of the story, about how I'd forced her to seek comfort elsewhere because of how I'd shut her out emotionally. It was infuriating, watching her try to drag my reputation through the mud. But I stuck to the plan. I let her keep talking, knowing the truth was about to come out in a big way. Then came the court day, and I'll admit, I was nervous. Rachel showed up with her lawyer, trying her best to look composed and sympathetic. She dressed in a conservative suit, probably hoping it'd make her look like some kind of victim. But as the hearing started, her mask began to slip. My lawyer presented every piece of evidence: the emails, the photos, the recording of her admission. Rachel's face turned sheet white as the judge listened to her own voice confessing the affair. The attorney calmly walked through every piece of evidence, showing that not only had she cheated, but she'd also lied repeatedly to everyone around us. By the time he was done, her lawyer looked like he wanted to be anywhere but that courtroom. Rachel tried one last time, breaking down in tears, saying she was pressured into the affair, that she was misunderstood. She even threw in some vague claims about my emotional neglect. But the judge didn't buy it. With the evidence in front of them, There was nothing left for her to argue. In the end, the court honored our prenup to the letter. Rachel walked away with barely anything, a small settlement, the minimum amount required, but no more. I kept the house, my savings, everything she'd tried to grab. When the judge made the final ruling, I finally felt the weight lift off my shoulders. Walking out of that courtroom, I looked at Rachel one last time. She was still wiping her eyes, looking for pity, but I didn't feel anything. I'd given her years of my life, my trust, and my loyalty. And in the end, she'd lost everything by betraying me. After the court ruling, Rachel was a ghost. She moved out of the house within the week, leaving behind a mess of boxes and a few forgotten things in her rush. The place felt empty, sure, but it was a relief more than anything. I could finally breathe, finally feel like my own life was mine again. But the fallout wasn't over yet. Some of our friends still reached out, torn between what Rachel had told them and the reality they'd heard in court. Rachel had spun her story so well that a few people wanted to believe she was the wronged party. Part of me didn't want to bother explaining anything to them. Anyone who could believe her lies after everything wasn't worth my time. But others genuinely wanted to know what had happened, so I took the time to tell them the truth, bit by bit. One of the most surprising calls I got was from Brad's wife. I didn't know her well, we'd only crossed paths a handful of times at work events or holiday parties. But she'd heard about the trial and pieced it together. Rachel, the co-worker she thought was a friend, had been sleeping with her husband. Brad's wife was furious, and I couldn't blame her. We ended up talking for over an hour, swapping details, comparing notes. She even sent me screenshots of some messages Brad had sent Rachel. It was brutal to read, but it also brought a strange sense of closure. I wasn't alone in this mess. Rachel tried to salvage what was left of her image, of course. She started putting up social media posts about new beginnings and moving forward, even hinting that she'd been treated unfairly. But she didn't mention the affair, didn't mention that she was with Brad now. That part stayed conveniently hidden. It didn't matter to me though, I had what I needed to move on. One night, I ran into one of her close friends, a guy named Dave. Dave had been one of the few friends who'd sided with her early on, buying her story that I'd been some cold, neglectful husband. He walked up to me, looking uncomfortable, and asked if we could talk. Turns out he'd just heard the real story and wanted to apologize for not supporting me, for believing her lies. I told him it was fine, that I didn't hold it against him. But I did say I'd be a lot more careful about who I trusted from now on. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the life I'd lost started coming back to me. I picked up old hobbies, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages, and finally started feeling like myself again. But there was one last thing I wanted to do, a final act to close the book on Rachel and everything she'd put me through. I took a picture of the courthouse ruling and filed it with a short, simple post on social media. No accusations, no drama, just a quiet acknowledgement of the end of our marriage and a thank you to those who'd supported me. I knew it would sting Rachel, seeing me move on so publicly, showing everyone that I'd come out of this clean, with my life intact. The reactions were immediate. Friends and family poured in with messages of support, people I hadn't heard from in years reaching out to offer an ear, a drink, or a laugh. The support was humbling, and it reminded me that, no matter what Rachel had tried to take, she hadn't succeeded in isolating me. I wasn't alone in this, and I hadn't been forgotten. As I put the phone down, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Rachel and Brad could have their new beginning and their little secrets. I was free, and for the first time in ages, I felt ready to take my own first steps forward, without any shadows dragging behind me. With Rachel gone and the legal battle over, I started focusing on rebuilding my life. The house felt empty, sure, but it also felt like a clean slate. I moved her things out, redecorated, got rid of all the little reminders of her that had lingered, like that picture of us from our honeymoon on the fridge, or her ridiculous throw pillows she insisted on. The house slowly began to feel like mine again, like a space where I could finally start fresh. One evening, my buddy Tom invited me out to a casual get-together at his place. I almost declined. I'd spent so much time wrapped up in the mess with Rachel that being social felt like a chore. But something told me to go. Maybe it was the need to be around people who didn't remind me of the drama, or just the chance to feel like I was part of something normal again. So I showed up with a couple of beers and a cautious smile, hoping I'd enjoy myself. The first few hours were awkward. A few of our friends were clearly avoiding any mention of Rachel, and others gave me those sympathetic looks, as if they were afraid I'd break down at any moment. But Tom kept things light, cracking jokes, nudging me to talk about anything but my ex-wife. And slowly, I found myself relaxing, laughing along, almost forgetting about the whole ordeal. Then, as the night wore on, Tom introduced me to someone. Her name was Emma, and she was a friend of his from college. She wasn't flashy, didn't come across as the life of the party, but there was something genuine about her, something warm. We got to talking, mostly about our shared taste in music and travel stories. I found myself telling her about places I'd always wanted to visit, dreams that had been put on hold while I tried to build a life with Rachel. Emma listened, genuinely interested, laughing in all the right places and sharing stories of her own. It was the first time in what felt like forever that I could talk about my own dreams and plans without feeling weighed down by the past. I don't know if it was the beers or just the fact that I hadn't let myself connect with someone in so long, but I felt lighter, more hopeful. After a while, she asked about my divorce. She'd heard bits and pieces from Tom but wanted to know the real story. Surprisingly, I didn't feel any bitterness or anger as I told her the basics. I didn't go into the details of Rachel's betrayal, I didn't want to relive that. But I shared enough for her to understand what I'd been through, and instead of offering me pity, she just nodded, as if to say, I get it, but that doesn't define you. By the end of the night, she gave me her number and a simple smile. No pressure, no expectations. Just a genuine connection. As I left Tom's place, I realized that for the first time, I was looking forward to something instead of just moving away from the past. The next few weeks flew by in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Emma and I started texting, then meeting up for coffee or dinner. We'd talk about everything, work, life, the places we wanted to visit, even the books we were reading. With Emma, I didn't feel the need to perform or to be anything other than who I was. She knew about my past, but she never brought it up. It was like a silent understanding that my past was just that, behind me. But more than anything, Emma reminded me that there was still a lot of life left to live. She'd come over to my house sometimes, and together we'd work on little projects, like painting a room or planting a small garden in the backyard. She even helped me pick out a new couch, laughing as I tried to decide between 2 shades of gray, saying I was overthinking it way too much. She made me feel like my life could be simple again, like the future was something to look forward to instead of something to survive. For the first time in a long time, I was living my own life, on my own terms. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all. Just as I was settling into this new rhythm with Emma, a knock on my door interrupted the quiet. I opened it, and there stood Rachel. She looked nothing like the confident, composed woman who had smugly walked out of court. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her face drawn, like she hadn't slept in days. "Jason, can we talk?" she asked, her voice wavering. Every instinct in me told me to slam the door, but against my better judgment, I stepped back and let her in. She shuffled inside, taking in the changes I'd made to the place, her eyes lingering on the empty spaces where her things used to be. She looked around like she barely recognized it. We sat down, me on the armchair, her on the edge of the couch. There was an awkward silence before she finally spoke. I just came to say I'm sorry." She paused, looking down at her hands. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it. I didn't say anything, just let her go on. She started apologizing for making mistakes, calling her affair with Brad a momentary lapse, as if it had been some small one-time error. But what really got me was when she tried to turn it back on me, saying, "We had problems, Jason. We weren't as close as we used to be. Maybe if you'd paid more attention." That was it. I cut her off. "Rachel, stop. This isn't about what I did or didn't do. You made your choices, and you tried to rewrite history to make yourself the victim. You tried to take everything from me, paint me as the problem, and run off with someone else. And now, when things didn't turn out the way you planned, you're back here, blaming me." She looked stunned, like she hadn't expected me to push back. I could see the wheels turning, like she was deciding whether to keep defending herself or try a different approach. She softened, putting on a face I remembered from years ago. "I just thought, maybe we could try again. Start fresh." I couldn't help but laugh. "Rachel, we're done. You burned every bridge between us. And honestly, I've moved on. I'm happy without you." Her eyes narrowed at that. "Oh, so this is about her? This new girl?" The anger in her voice surprised me. She'd cheated, lied, and tried to take everything, yet here she was, furious that I might actually be happy without her. I shook my head. "This is about you and your choices. You wanted to leave, and you did. Now I'm finally living my life again. She sat there, seething for a moment, and then got up, her face a mask of anger. I hope she knows what she's getting into. Don't expect her to stay forever either, she snapped before storming out. As the door closed behind her, I felt an odd sense of peace. It was like the last trace of her had finally left my life. Her chapter was over, for good. And this time, I didn't feel any need to look back. I texted Emma, telling her about the visit. She laughed it off, saying, "Guess she couldn't handle that you got the last word." And she was right. Rachel had expected me to be stuck in the past, but the truth was, I had everything I needed to move forward. That night, I went to bed feeling more sure of myself than I had in years. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about knowing that I'd taken back my life. After Rachel's visit, I expected a few days of lingering frustration, but surprisingly, I felt more at peace than I'd imagined possible. She'd come back, tried to stir up the guilt and manipulation she was used to, and it hadn't worked. I'd finally said what I needed to, put her in her place, and sent her out the door for good. Emma noticed the change in me right away. The next time we were out for dinner, she asked, "You seem lighter, like you're not carrying that weight around anymore. I take it Rachel's visit didn't rattle you." I smiled, appreciating how well she could read me. Not in the way I thought it might. Honestly, it just confirmed I made the right choice. She's stuck in the past, trying to blame everyone but herself. I don't need to be part of that anymore. Emma reached across the table, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. "You deserve so much better, Jason. And it looks like you're finally realizing it." After that, things between us started to deepen naturally. I didn't have to question Emma's intentions or wonder if she was telling me the truth. With her, everything was straightforward. We kept things relaxed, spending evenings together at her place or mine, cooking dinners, watching movies, just enjoying each other's company. And unlike the exhausting years with Rachel, there was no pressure, no expectation, just a genuine connection. One Saturday, as we were putting the finishing touches on a shelf we'd been building together, I brought up something that had been on my mind. "You know, I'm realizing now how much I was holding back. How I let so much slide, made excuses for Rachel's behavior, because I thought that's just what relationships were." Emma looked over, putting down her screwdriver. It's easy to get stuck in that mindset, especially if you're with someone who takes advantage of it. But from what I can see, you're not the same person you were back then. She was right. I felt stronger, more sure of myself, like I'd finally taken charge of my life again. And as the days passed, I noticed just how much my outlook on love and trust had shifted. Emma and I talked openly about our pasts, our goals, our fears, without any of the pretense that had once been so common with Rachel. For the first time, I was in a relationship that didn't feel like a battle for control. A few weeks later, Emma invited me to a small gathering with some of her close friends. I knew she was testing the waters, wanting to see if her world and mine could mesh. We spent the evening chatting, laughing, and telling stories with her friends, who were warm and welcoming. I felt a strange relief, realizing that these people knew Emma as someone she truly was, not the version of herself she had to pretend to be. And that meant I could finally be myself, too. As we walked back to her place that night, she slipped her hand into mine. "I'm glad you came. I know it's not always easy, putting yourself out there again." I stopped, turning to her. "You've shown me it doesn't have to be hard. I think I just needed a reminder that real relationships don't have to come with conditions or ultimatums." Emma smiled, pulling me into a hug. "Well, I think you've earned that reminder, Jason. And I'm not going anywhere." With Emma, life felt hopeful again, and I could finally see a future without the shadows of my past hanging over me. Rachel's betrayal was a part of my story, sure, but it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. With things falling into place with Emma, it seemed like my life was finally on track. I'd put Rachel's betrayal behind me, found someone who made me feel valued, and was genuinely happy for the first time in years. But just when I thought the past was firmly in the rearview mirror, I got a text from an old friend, someone I hadn't expected to hear from. "Hey man, can we catch up? Need to talk." It was from Steve, one of my closest friends back in the day, and someone who distanced himself after the divorce. Turns out, Rachel had been filling his ear with her story, twisting everything to make herself seem like the victim. He'd believed her, or at least enough of it to cut me off without a second thought. I hadn't bothered reaching out to him after that. But now, for whatever reason, he was reaching out to me. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet him at a bar we used to frequent. I arrived first, grabbed a seat in the corner, and watched as Steve walked in, looking around nervously until he spotted me. He gave a tentative wave before sitting down across from me, looking almost embarrassed. "Thanks for meeting up," he started, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, sure," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "So what's up?" Steve took a deep breath, then said, "Look, I owe you an apology. I know I fell for Rachel's version of things, and I didn't give you a chance to explain. I don't know, I guess I thought I knew her." I raised an eyebrow. "And now?" He looked down, fiddling with his drink. "Now, I see I was wrong. After the court stuff and all the things I heard from others, it hit me. She wasn't who I thought she was. But I still feel like an idiot for believing her over you." I nodded, taking in his words. "Yeah, well, it's easy to believe the person who cries the loudest. She was good at playing the victim." He grimaced, guilt etched on his face. "I'm sorry, Jason. I should have come to you instead of just taking her word for it. I was a lousy friend. Part of me wanted to just let it go, to brush it off as water under the bridge. But there was another part of me that needed him to understand the impact his actions had had on me. You know, Steve, it wasn't just Rachel's betrayal that hurt. It was realizing that people I thought I could count on just disappeared. You weren't the only one, but you were one of the closest. When she started spreading lies, none of you checked in. None of you asked me what happened. You just accepted her story and left me hanging." He nodded, his face red with shame. "I know, and you're right. I was wrong. I guess I just didn't want to believe that someone we all trusted could do what she did. But that's on me, and I'm sorry." I let his apology sink in, and after a long silence I finally said, "Look, I appreciate you coming clean. It takes guts to admit you were wrong. And I'm not saying everything's forgiven overnight, but we can work on it. Friends deserve second chances too." Steve looked up, relief in his eyes. "Thanks, man. I'll make it up to you, I promise." We talked for a while, catching up on life since everything had gone down. I could tell he was making an effort, genuinely trying to rebuild the bridge he'd burned. And as we sat there, laughing over old memories, I realized that while I'd lost a lot in the fallout with Rachel, maybe I hadn't lost everything. That night, I drove home feeling lighter, like another weight had been lifted. Forgiving Steve didn't erase the past, but it reminded me that moving forward sometimes meant leaving a door open for people willing to make things right. After that night with Steve, I started reconnecting with other friends who had distanced themselves during the divorce. Some reached out with awkward texts, others sent long messages apologizing for believing Rachel's lies. A few of them admitted that they'd wanted to reach out, but they'd been caught up in the drama, unsure of what to believe. While I couldn't blame them, I made it clear that things would only move forward if they were willing to come with honesty. One by one, I mended those friendships. Some were easier to rebuild than others, but it felt good to get back pieces of the life Rachel had tried to take from me. It reminded me that even though I'd been dragged through hell, I still had roots, a community, and a foundation that Rachel's betrayal couldn't fully destroy. Emma saw the changes in me, too. She was supportive, always encouraging me to meet up with old friends, letting me share stories without judgment. She never pushed but would ask questions that showed me she genuinely cared about my past. More than anyone, Emma understood how healing wasn't just about moving forward. It was about reclaiming the parts of yourself you'd let go of along the way. One day, as we were sitting in a coffee shop, she looked at me with this soft smile. "I'm proud of you, you know," she said, resting her hand on mine. "You're facing all these things that a lot of people would just bury. It's brave." Hearing that from her meant more than I could explain. For so long, I'd felt like I was just surviving, clawing my way out of the mess Rachel left behind. But Emma saw something else, someone who was healing, who was reclaiming his life bit by bit. It was as if she'd given me permission to feel proud of myself, to see the strength it took to rebuild. A week later, I came across something that put all that strength to the test, an old box of memories. I'd been going through the garage, clearing out the last of the junk that Rachel had left behind. Buried under old photo albums and holiday decorations was a small, dusty box labeled Jason and Rachel. Inside were photos, notes we'd written to each other over the years, ticket stubs from concerts and trips we'd taken together. Memories of a life I'd thought would last forever. I sat there for a long time, staring at those fragments of the past. Part of me felt a pang of nostalgia, a reminder of the days when I believed in us. But another part felt a deep sense of relief, like I was looking at a life that belonged to someone else, a version of me I'd left behind. Without overthinking it, I grabbed the box, carried it outside, and tossed it in the trash. As the lid closed, I felt this strange sense of freedom, as if I'd finally closed the last page on that chapter. The past was just that, past. And with Emma in my life and my friendships slowly healing, I realized I didn't need those reminders anymore. That night, I told Emma about the box and what I'd done. She smiled, pulling me close. "Sounds like you're really ready to move on." "Yeah," I said, holding her hand. "I think I am." And for the first time, I felt it, an honest, unburdened hope for the future, knowing that everything I needed was right in front of me. After letting go of that box, something shifted in me. Life with Emma felt more real, more grounded. We started spending more time together, and before I knew it, we were practically living in each other's spaces. My home, once tainted by the memory of Rachel, now felt like ours. Emma brought a warmth to the place that I hadn't realized was missing, a couple of cozy blankets, a framed photo of us, some plants that she promised she'd keep alive. Little touches that made it feel like a home, not just a house. One weekend, she suggested we take a short trip, just the two of us. "I think you need a break," she'd said, smiling as she waved 2 tickets in front of me. She'd planned a getaway to a small lakeside cabin up north. A place to disconnect, recharge, and just be together. The cabin was perfect, nestled among trees with a view of the lake that felt like something out of a painting. The first night, as we sat by the fire, watching the lake darken under the night sky, Emma asked me what I wanted for the future. It was the first time anyone had asked me that since the divorce, and it caught me off guard. For a long moment, I stared into the fire, unsure how to put it into words. But then it came to me, simple and clear. "I want peace," I said. "And I want something real. Something I don't have to second guess. I've had enough of lies and games to last a lifetime." Emma nodded, squeezing my hand. "You deserve that, Jason. And I want to be part of it. No drama, no games. Just us." We sat there, letting that promise settle between us. And in that quiet, I realized I'd finally found what I'd been searching for. It wasn't just about escaping the past, it was about building something genuine, something that felt solid and lasting. The next few days were like a dream. We hiked trails, cooked together in the little kitchen, shared stories by the fire. For the first time in years, I felt fully present, like I was living in each moment without the shadow of my past creeping in. Emma didn't just listen, she understood. She let me be vulnerable without pitying me, let me share the pieces of myself I'd guarded so closely. And with each story, each memory, I felt like I was laying the groundwork for something new. On our last day at the cabin, as we stood on the dock watching the sunrise, Emma turned to me, her face soft in the morning light. "You know," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I think we're ready for more. A new beginning." I looked at her, feeling that same warmth, that quiet certainty. "Yeah," I replied. "I think so too." In that moment, I realized that Emma wasn't just part of my future, she was my future. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt truly grateful for every step that had led me here, to this new chapter with her. Returning from the cabin, everything felt different. The world seemed brighter, lighter, like I was seeing it through new eyes. Emma and I had shared something real up there, something I hadn't even known I was missing. And from that point on, things between us just clicked. We started talking about what we wanted for the future, not in a pressured way, but in a way that felt exciting, as if all the pieces were falling into place. We made it a habit to plan small US weekends, even if it was just staying home and cooking a fancy dinner, exploring a new spot in town, or watching old movies sprawled out on the couch. We didn't need anything extravagant, just each other's company felt like enough. One evening, as we were fixing dinner in my kitchen, Emma paused, looking at me with that familiar, thoughtful smile. "I was thinking, how would you feel about moving in together?" She laughed, almost shyly. "I mean, I'm practically here all the time anyway, and I'd like to make it official, you know." I couldn't stop the grin that spread across my face. "Emma, I'd love that. Honestly, this place has felt more like home since you've been around than it ever did before." So she moved in. It was surprisingly easy, almost seamless. She brought her things over little by little, and we made a few changes to blend our tastes. Every bit of the process felt right. By the end of it, I could hardly remember what the house had felt like before her presence filled every room. The more we settled in together, the more I noticed how different life was with Emma, calm, steady, no unexpected emotional landmines. We knew each other, trusted each other, and there was a kind of honesty between us that I'd once thought only existed in stories. There was no lingering doubt, no second-guessing her words or wondering what she really meant. With her, I could be fully myself, without the fear that it would somehow backfire. A few months later, Emma and I took a day trip to a nearby coastal town. We wandered along the shore, the waves lapping against our feet as we talked about everything from travel plans to the small bookstore we wanted to open together someday. On a whim, I pulled her close, wrapping my arm around her as we walked. And in that moment, watching her laugh with the sea breeze tangling her hair, it just hit me. "Emma," I said, stopping so I could look her in the eyes, "I know it's soon, and I know we've been through a lot, but I've never been more sure of anything. I want to spend my life with you. You're my future." Her face softened, and she took my hands in hers. "Jason, I've known for a long time that you're it for me. Yes, let's do this. Let's build that future together." We didn't need an elaborate plan or some grand gesture. It was simple, quiet, and everything I could have hoped for. The past was officially behind me. Rachel's betrayal, the lies, the pain, it all felt like something that had happened to someone else, like a story I'd read once and left on a dusty shelf. I had a new life, a love built on trust and respect, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Emma and I walked back along the shore, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next together. After that day on the shore, Emma and I were inseparable, planning our future with a sense of certainty and excitement I'd never felt before. It didn't take long for us to decide that we wanted to make it official. No elaborate wedding, just something small and meaningful with the people closest to us. We both wanted to focus on each other, on the life we were building, rather than on any fanfare or spectacle. We chose a small, beautiful spot by the lake where we'd spent so many weekends. With the leaves turning, the air crisp, and the water reflecting the golden autumn light, it was the perfect place. Only a handful of friends and family came, including Tom, my loyal friend, and Steve, who had been putting in the effort to rebuild our friendship since that long conversation at the bar. Even my mom and dad, both ecstatic to see me happy and settled again, were there. Emma looked breathtaking in a simple white dress, her face beaming as she walked down a path lined with wildflowers. Standing there, waiting for her to reach me, I felt like everything I'd ever been through had led me to this exact moment. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, it had all been worth it to be here now, starting this life with someone who truly loved and respected me. When she reached me, she took my hands in hers, and we shared our vows quietly, just for each other. I promised her trust, loyalty, and laughter. She promised me patience, understanding, and a love that would grow with us, not against us. It was simple, but it was everything I'd ever wanted. Afterward, we celebrated with good food, laughter, and stories. It was small and personal, just as we'd wanted. And as the sun began to set, casting golden light over the lake, we took a walk down to the shore, away from everyone else, just the two of us. Emma leaned against my shoulder, her fingers intertwined with mine. "This feels like a dream," she whispered, looking up at me. "It's real," I said, pulling her close. "I can't wait to see where we go from here." For the first time in my life, I felt a true, unshakable sense of peace, a peace I hadn't even realized was missing. Standing there with Emma, watching the sky shift from gold to soft pink and purple, I knew my life was my own again, and I had someone by my side who valued it as much as I did. We walked back to join our friends and family, hand in hand, ready to face the future together. And in that moment, I realized that everything I'd been through, all the twists and turns, had led me to something far better than I'd ever imagined. This wasn't just the end of one chapter. It was the beginning of a story that I knew would last a lifetime.
Bye.